When you lock your doors, do you feel safe? Do you ever double check, maybe just before going to sleep? How secure would you feel living alone? See, most of the time, that's probably enough. But when someone or something is determined to get inside, you'll quickly realize how many openings there really are. Fortunately, most of you guys won't have to live that reality. I mean, who wants to experience that, right? But statistically, some of you will experience it. The story that I'm about to tell you is about somebody who believed that they were safe. They were in a secure house located in a safe neighborhood. Yet in one night, the illusion of safety was shattered into a million pieces. But before we get into it, if you're new here, I like to discuss all sorts of things such as horror and terrifying experiences, supernatural or not. But I always focus on the true stories, or at least I try my best to, even if the story is allegedly true. So if you're into that sort of thing and you like the type of content that I make, please like and subscribe before we take the dive. Thank you very much. Let's get into it. So in 2017, there is a woman who we'll refer to as Nancy. She moves into this lovely home in Northern California, just outside the suburbs, rural enough that there were no streetlights. And I mean, she did have neighbors, but they were pretty far away. But she loved it, and I mean, hey, from the sounds of it, I would love it too. It was a beautiful area, and she'd grown used to going out onto her porch at night to stargaze. There was very little light pollution here after all, which she really loved. And overall, she'd just grown to love the living experience here. And although she didn't see her neighbors too frequently, she did become acquainted with them and learned that they were an elderly couple. They were kind people, so she felt warm and welcome in the area. To Nancy, it overall felt like a very comforting and welcoming neighborhood. And it helped that people weren't really too crammed together, so you didn't have to see people if you didn't want to see people. That being said, she quickly felt herself settling in, and she did not see herself moving anytime soon. So fast forward to a bit later in 2017, it is now winter. Nancy pulls up into her driveway after a long day of work. Feeling exhausted and wanting nothing more than her bed, Nancy opens her car door and steps onto her driveway. She makes her way towards the front door, but before she grabs the knob, she sort of freezes in place for a moment. Nancy thinks to herself, that's strange. It wasn't what she saw, but rather what she was smelling. Nancy could smell cigarette smoke. Naturally, Nancy was not a smoker, nor did she know any smokers. As far as she was concerned, her neighbors weren't smokers either because she's never seen them smoke in all her time here. Also, this wasn't a high traffic area by any means. She thought it was a little strange and, if she was being totally honest with herself, a little unsettling. But Nancy quickly rationalized that even if it wasn't her neighbors, it was probably a guest that they had that had stepped outside for a smoke, and maybe the smell just carried far enough for her to smell it. After all, on the street that Nancy was living on, the only people that ever really had a reason to come onto the street were her and her neighbors. Now, it didn't really help that today was particularly foggy. She couldn't see very much even when she was pulling into her driveway. She could really only see what was illuminated by her fog lights. Therefore, there wasn't really much to speak about concerning visibility today. But Nancy stopped herself from thinking too deeply into it. She told herself that she was just working herself up and she needed to relax. She does a quick once-over, glancing over her shoulder. Obviously, she doesn't see anything. So, remembering how fatigued she felt, she just sort of decided to go inside and maybe she'd take a shower today. Maybe she'd skip dinner and just get straight into bed. Opening her door, she removes her shoes, sets her bag to the side, and heads upstairs. She ultimately did decide that even though it was a bit early, just around 7 p.m., she would take a shower and just hit the hay nice and early. So Nancy does exactly that. She goes, she takes a shower, and then she gets into bed. As Nancy is laying there, she's thinking about what she's going to do tomorrow, what she's going to eat, her commute to work, and pretty quickly, Nancy drifts off into a deep slumber. That is, until she hears something. Now, Nancy is thinking to herself, That sounds like it was on the first floor. This is when her brain does the thing that all of our brains do. It immediately begins to rationalize the sound that she heard. Was it an animal outside, perhaps? No, it sounded too close. This is when Nancy remembers her close friend who was taking classes inside of the city but working their day job outside of the city. And truthfully speaking, sometimes it was much more convenient for him to come back to her place as opposed to going all the way back to the city on such a tight schedule. She had actually given him a spare key to let himself in when she wasn't around or when she was asleep. This was just so that he could take a shower, change, and just get going. It was a lot easier for the two of them, and they were close enough that it was just fine. Now, he would normally text her out of courtesy to let her know, hey, I'm coming by, I'm gonna take a shower, that sort of thing. And they rarely ran into each other because the hours that he might swing by were truly odd. So thinking along these lines, Nancy was fairly certain that it was him at this point. She grabs her phone from the nightstand, fully expecting to see a text message from her friend. When Nancy checked the phone, she squinted because her phone brightness made it so that she couldn't immediately see the contents that were on the screen. So, for whatever reason, Nancy decided she would just put the phone down and actually just shout. She figured it would be a lot faster than checking her phone, checking her messages, and she also didn't want the sleepiness to go away after staring at that bright screen for too long. So she yells out to her friend, but she's met with silence. After a moment, she yells out again, but still silence. Then, all of a sudden, she hears very loud footsteps running across the first floor. And they were getting closer, not further. Soon enough, she registered that the footsteps were now on the first step of the staircase, coming up. Finally, she unfreezes and practically vaults herself out of bed towards her closet. As soon as she entered her closet, she could tell by the sound where this person was. They were now on the second floor at the start of the hallway. To describe the layout of upstairs from where Nancy was, looking immediately out of her bedroom door to the left, you would see the staircase leading downwards. Straight ahead would be a closed bedroom door, and to the right would be the rest of the hallway leading to the bathroom with the door open. The intruder charged straight upstairs, straight past her bedroom door, and straight into the bathroom. She didn't know why, and she didn't really care to question it right now either. With what I would consider a very bold move, she saw the opportunity to open the attic crawl space, which was, fortunately, inside of her closet. And after she opens it up, she clambers inside of it very quickly. But before she could even pull her feet all the way up into the crawl space, she hears footsteps quickly coming back down the hallway, presumably to check the bedrooms for the residents of this home. Her bedroom door goes flying open, and this person, this stranger, enters the room. Even though she was trying to see, she couldn't quite see who the person was from this angle yet. But just as the man flicks on the light, she manages to bring her legs up to her chest. She sucks in a deep breath and tries not to make any sounds whatsoever. Just as she wanted to place the cover back over the attic opening, the man opens the closet door, looking around. He didn't look up, fortunately, but this allowed Nancy to partially see him. He appeared to be wearing tattered jeans that led down to a pair of dirty work boots. And this kind of cemented that this was not her friend from the city. Now, while she's looking at this intruder's shoes and pants, her heart nearly beating out of her chest, wondering if he's gonna look up and see her, effectively trapping her, knowing there was nothing she could do and nowhere she could go if he only looked up there and spotted her. He suddenly turns around after seeing that she was not in the closet and then begins to rummage around her belongings, unclear of whether he's looking for her or something else. He knocks over the dresser, he flips over the bed, and he just screams. This aggressive and frustrated scream that just reverberates around the room. And while he's doing all of this, just one level and a few feet away from her, she gently pushes the crawl space cover back over the opening, effectively sealing any light and visibility that she had. But at the very least, she's now safely tucked away. She spends the next few hours in here just listening to this absolute madman wreak havoc on the interior of her home. At this point, it was pretty clear that he was searching for her, and he even began shouting,
"Where are you?"
at some point. He even retraced his steps, revisiting the bathroom and her bedroom again. She could hear him in the hallway saying,
"I'm gonna find you. I know you haven't left."
Just as her skin was crawling with goosebumps, she could smell it. The psychopath that was rummaging through her house was now trying to calm himself down a bit. And although it hadn't gone completely quiet yet, she could smell the cigarette smoke. Naturally, her mind went back to earlier, but there was nothing she could do about it now. So she stayed huddled in this attic for what felt like an eternity. And she spent her time convincing herself that he would not discover this opening. It was, after all, a pretty obscure opening. You'd have to really be looking for it to see it. And so she hoped and prayed that he would not find it. Possibly to console herself, she began counting. She said, "If I can count to 1,000 in complete silence, then he's probably gone." But then, while counting, she would hit maybe 200 or so, and then she would hear more rummaging or more cursing from somewhere in the house. And then she would reset, going back to 0, just hoping he would leave soon. And eventually, she did manage to do it. By now it was about 5 or 6 in the morning, and this man was rampaging through her house for hours looking for her. But now she finally believed that it was safe enough for her to come down from the crawl space. But she would definitely peek first, just in case. So, pushing aside the crawl space little by little, she moved it until she could see inside of her room to some degree. And from what she could see from this tiny vantage point was that there was broken glass on the floor, there were clothes strewn all over the place, but most importantly, there was no sign of the man. And so Nancy wriggles down from this space, cautiously and slowly, before quickly darting across the torn apart bedroom. Moving past her flipped over bed, she quickly begins to look around for her phone. While looking, she could even see that there's holes in the wall, likely from being punched or kicked. But then she finds her phone and then immediately goes back up into the crawl space. She calls the police, whispering and doing her best to stay very quiet. She's afraid that maybe he'll come back, or worse, maybe he never left. She just knew she had to tell the police what was going on, because if he was still there, she would be dead if he caught her. So the police tell her that they'll be there ASAP, and she waits. Maybe 15 minutes later, the police arrive outside the door. She heard them arrive, and she heard them knocking as well.
"Police, if there's anyone inside, make your presence known."
They then enter the house and begin to sweep the first floor. Nancy can hear them throughout all of this, but she didn't really feel safe enough to calm down until the police began to call out for her by her first name. Finally, Nancy felt safe enough to leave her safe space, and so she once again wriggled down the little crawl space entry and landed safely in the closet before making her way out and making contact with the police. Sure enough, the police explained to Nancy that there's nobody here. They did a sweeping of the residence. They've searched every nook and cranny. They haven't found anybody else. Then they asked Nancy if she'd like to walk around and see if anything had been stolen or taken from her home. She agrees, naturally, and unsurprisingly, every room in the house is absolutely torn apart and wrecked. A nearby officer commented that you're a very lucky girl to avoid the person who did all of this. That would have been a very dangerous encounter. It was a great decision to jump into that crawl space. Feeling as though it was obvious, Nancy asked, "What makes you say that?" The officer replies, "We found a number of knives removed from your butcher block and just scattered around the house. If we had to guess, it would appear that, out of frustration, the intruder was just slashing at different things and then just throwing that knife away before grabbing another. Crawling into that attic space most certainly saved your life tonight." Nancy did not seem to value her life, however, because, although the ordeal had left her shaken up, she stayed at this house for a full 3 years longer before finally moving away from there. She claims that she was living in constant fear after that incident, and that she just really felt like it might happen again if she didn't move. It was truly traumatic, so she just had to move. She had to get out of there. I don't know why it took 3 years, but This story is an extreme example of how unsafe we may actually be, despite how safe we think we are. We can and should take protective measures such as burglar bars, deadbolts, security cameras, and so forth. But, like I said at the start, a lot of us never really expect to encounter something like this. It could happen to anybody though. This was undeniably based on a true story, one that Mr. Bolland covered as well. I can't give the source, however, because it doesn't seem very well documented. Furthermore, I'm pretty sure this is a first-hand account, and this is not in any newspaper that I know of, which in turn makes it that much more difficult to gather information on this story. But like always, don't forget that I am always chasing the truth. Thank you guys for listening, and I'll see you next time.